Happy Friday, everyone. Jim here from The Haunted Walk with a little special bonus content for you. Last Friday, we released our podcast episode on the future of the Kingston Penitentiary, and the response has been quite phenomenal. So thank you to everyone for listening, sharing your comments, your thoughts, your feedback. If you haven't listened to the episode yet, you can always hear it at hauntedwalk.com/podcasts, or if you search on iTunes for Haunted Talks, you can find it there as well. Now, on the show, I spoke to 5 experts. And as happens, you always have to cut the interviews down to kind of the absolutely key points during the show. But I did want to share an extended piece that I was not able to put in the main podcast from Ranger John Cantwell, who is one of the longest serving park rangers on Alcatraz Island. I wanted to share this because I don't think many people are aware of the history of Alcatraz. We all really know it as this prison, but it has a completely different side to it as well. So, without further ado, here's Ranger John Cantwell on the history of Alcatraz.
Yeah, the term on Alcatraz that the Rangers use for the general public is the layered history of the rock. We've got 80 years of Army history, and that's why Congress, the United States Congress, has saved Alcatraz as a national park site, a historic site, because of its military history, not because of Al Capone. And I know everybody comes out to hear that prison story, the Al Capone story, the worst of the worst criminals being housed on Alcatraz, but that's only 29 years of history. The military arrives in 1853 on Alcatraz, and they start construction of an artillery fort. And by 1857, we were up and ready for action. The gold rush had created a big stir in California, and a lot of money coming out of California. And one of our missions in the middle of the bay, San Francisco Bay, was to protect the harbor, but also the money that was coming out of San Francisco from the gold rush. So during the Civil War, we actually had concerns about the Confederacy sailing around the Horn and coming into San Francisco Bay and stealing the gold and using that money to support their war efforts. So Alcatraz played a key role in protecting the Union during the Civil War. And that's also when we get our start as a prison. It's a difficult location to escape from. We're surrounded by very cold water, anywhere from 48 to 55 degrees year-round, and the currents move around Alcatraz quickly, 4, 5, 6 knots, like a river, going out to sea twice a day and coming into the San Francisco Bay twice a day. So if you're not ready for the temperature and the currents, that's what's going to stop you from making the swim across the San Francisco Bay. So the military history, basically 80 years on the island. We never saw any battles on Alcatraz. The cannons were smoothbore cannons. We had about 100 cannon on Alcatraz during the Civil War. And we served our purpose out here. Nobody attacked us, and the prison was just a natural progression with bringing soldiers, of course, that went to maybe AWOL in the military or strike an officer. They were quartered on the island. But even during the Civil War, we had Confederate sympathizers locked up on Alcatraz. American Indians were brought to the island during the Indian Wars. We even had political prisoners. The Hutterites, for their religious beliefs, did not want to join the United States Army, so they were imprisoned on Alcatraz. So turn of the century, the United States Army gives us a new mission: Disciplinary Barracks Pacific Branch, Alcatraz Island. And with that new name, we got a new prison building that people still tour today. That building was completed in 1912. And the soldiers that built it were the prisoners on Alcatraz, and once they completed that building, they moved into their new home. It's about 600 jail cells inside the building, at least at the time the military used the facility, and that lasts up to 1933. But with the Depression, the United States Army decides that it's too expensive to run, so they leave the island in 1934, or 33, I'm sorry. And in 1934, the Federal Bureau of Prisons take over, and they ran it as an escape-proof prison. And that's what most people know Alcatraz for, is the home of the worst of the worst. And there were only about 1,500 convicts that did time during those 29 years on Alcatraz. The average population was around 250 prisoners at one time. They went up to 300 at the highest point of prison population during the Federal Bureau of Prisons. We had 100 guards on Alcatraz, so that's a very high guard ratio, 1 to 3 basically. They counted everybody 12 times a day. And the feds are pretty much convinced that no one ever escaped from Alcatraz. So it served its purpose well, and the main reason, again, it closes in 1963 because of operating costs, too expensive expenses. With the ecology movement, the waste was going into the bay, garbage. They had to change their ways, and Robert Kennedy, Attorney General Bobby Kennedy, is the man that closes Alcatraz, and they built it. The island was up for sale in 1966. Recently, I found out the government appraised the island at $1 million, and you can't even buy you can't even buy a house in San Francisco for under $1 million now. But the 22-acre rock was up for sale, and there were lots of different ideas: bird sanctuary, playground for kids, have a Statue of Liberty on the West Coast, Space Needle. Lamar Hunt, a businessman from Texas, proposed an idea to have a hotel on the island and a casino, and the tourism industry in San Francisco seemed to like that idea, and they were moving forward with negotiations with Mr. Hunt and American Indians in the area that had been relocated off the reservations in the United States into the large cities across the states. New York, Chicago, San Francisco, Oakland had a large population of American Indian, and they proposed an idea to have a cultural center on Alcatraz to teach Indian ways. And these were college students at San Francisco State University that approached the government. They find this old treaty that says that they can use the island, and the government's response was, that's an old treaty, we're not going to honor that, like a lot of treaties that were broken with the American Indians. So they decide in 1969 to have a sit-in on Alcatraz, and it got media attention to what we had done to the American Indian. And President Nixon actually sides with the American Indian and keeps the Coast Guard and the police off the island, and it lasts for 19 months. And about 20,000 people came through Alcatraz during that occupation. And it worked. President Nixon, at the end of the occupation, apologizes to the American Indian for genocide, and he preserves the Indian reservation in the United States forever. So every Thanksgiving and Columbus Day, we actually have American Indians gathering on the island to commemorate that Indian takeover. And some would call it graffiti. We call it political messaging around the island. Indian land, Custer had it coming, Red Power. These are all slogans from that occupation, and it's an interpretive tool to help tell that story of the American Indian on Alcatraz Island. There's a line on the boat when people head out to Alcatraz. It's about a 15-minute ride across the bay. And I wish I came up with this line, but it says, Alcatraz, it's so much more than a prison.